Next subject, class number 4. The topic is the moon. So we started talking about the solar system and the universe, big picture, and then we zoomed in on the sun and then the earth, and now we're going to talk about the moon, the satellite that goes around the earth. Alright, so a little introduction to the moon. What is the moon? Moon is the dark satellite that orbits around Earth. So we discussed what a satellite is. A satellite is something that revolves around something else. We talked about what an orbit is, right? It revolves around the Earth, which means it goes around it. So a satellite, orbit, all tied together. And the reason we say it's dark is because it emits no light of its own. At night, when you look up into the sky, it looks like the moon is lit up, but it is actually not making any light of its own. It's only reflecting it from the sun off the moon back to us. And that's why you see it at night, because in the sun, or in the day, the sun is too bright. So it makes no light of its own. The moon isn't all that spectacular. It's kind of a big rocky orb, but it's because it's not spectacular that makes it so useful. It's a good reflecting surface to reflect the light of the sun back to us. It is useful in that it helps us keep time, or the month, which we'll talk about in a second. It reflects light to us at night, so it allows us to be able to work sometimes in the evening during the harvest moon. It also gives us the tides, which help cleanse the ocean and clean the shores. But we'll talk more about that stuff later. So, moon. Now, when I talked about it keeping time, look at how these words play together. So you start with moon, and then it goes to moonth, which then turns into month. And so what's a month, right? There's 12 months in the year, and they're about 28 to 31 days. A month is the time it takes the moon to orbit the Earth. So for it to make one full orbit around the Earth is a month, or a moon, moonth, month. So a month keeps track of how long it takes the moon to travel around the Earth. One other word I want you to be aware of is the Latin word. You'll hear another word related to the moon, and that's lunar. So in Latin, the word is lune, which means moon, and then we say lunar, so having to do with the moon. Kind of get words like lunatic, which might say, well wait, that means crazy. What does crazy have to do with the moon? But people believe that when the full moon was out there, it would pull on the water in your brain and make you crazy like it pulls on the tides of the Earth. So if you were a lunatic, it was someone who got crazy when the moon came out. So that word lunar, anywhere you see it, means having to do with the moon. Next up is the moon phases, or the lunar phases. So the appearance of the moon changes throughout the whole month. Starts as a full moon and then goes through different phases all the way back to the full moon again. And what this does is it helps us to track the month, or where we are in the month. So picture you didn't have calendars, or picture you didn't have a wristwatch or a computer or an iPad or an iPhone to tell you what time it was in the year. Then these phases help us track the month. I need you to watch the supplemental videos for this because it's kind of a hard concept to teach in class or on a blackboard, and I don't have the technical ability to add a YouTube video into this video, so I need you to watch it separate. It'll make a lot more sense. When we get into class, I'll have a globe and a flashlight, and we'll try to make sense how it works and what causes these phases of the moon. But for now, let's just talk about what they are and identify them, and then we'll talk more in class and you can watch the other supplemental videos. So, tracking the moon through its various phases. There's 5 different names for some of the phases, and some of them repeat. So let's say we start with a full moon. Full moon, it's our first position. Big, round, perfectly round, glowing orb in the sky. So then a few days later, we enter, as the moon starts to shrink, it's called the gibbous moon. Think of it like, give us more moon, we want more moon, give us more moon. So gibbous is the next phase. And then it's a half a shaped moon, but that's called the quarter moon. Now, that doesn't make sense why you would call something that's half a quarter, but it's not because you see a quarter of the moon, it's because it's a quarter of the way through the cycle. So, if there's 8 phases in the cycle, 1, 2 is a quarter of the way through 8. Or I'm sorry, so yeah, 1, 2 is a quarter of the way through 8. The next, that's halfway through the cycle of the new moon, and then 3/4 of the way you're back to another half moon. So just, that's why they call it a quarter moon and not a half moon, is because it's a quarter of the way through the cycle, even though it looks like half a moon. So we got full, gibbous, quarter moon, and then when it's like that little boomerang shape, right? I'm doing a horrible job. That boomerang shaped crescent, that's called the crescent moon. So it's starts full, starts shrinking to a gibbous, halfway shrunk to a quarter moon, all the way down to a crescent, and then to a new moon, which is really no moon. So think of it, N for new, N for no, new moon, no moon. Sky's completely black, can't see the moon. So right there, that's half the cycle, from full moon to new moon. That whole process, the big moon in the sky is shrinking. When something's shrinking, that's called waning, or it's waning away. So you start with the big full moon, it starts waning all the way to the new moon. Now right from there, we're not done with the full cycle yet until we get back to the full moon. Once we get to the new moon, that's kind of the end point, and then it starts waxing. Waxing means like the growing moon. So it starts from full, shrinks down to nothing, and then you'll see a crescent appear on the other side. See how they're opposite shapes? Crescent this way, then crescent this way. So new moon, new, to crescent, to quarter, to gibbous, to full. And now we've made one complete cycle of the moon with all 8 phases. All right, so there's our 8 phases. Remember again, the process of shrinking is called waning, and the process of growing is called waxing. Those are great vocabulary words because you can talk about them in other ways, like, ooh, my hunger is waxing. It means like my hunger is growing, I'm getting more hungry, or you know what, I'm getting sick, my hunger is waning, which means something's getting weaker or disappearing. So great vocab words. I'm gonna probably include those on the final exam. Dun, 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 dun. Eclipses, one of my favorite things to look at. We talked about the solar eclipse, now we're going to talk about a lunar eclipse. And eclipses have a lot to do with shadows. So when we looked at the solar eclipse, the moon came between the sun and the earth, and it made a shadow on the earth. So the sun would be blocked by the moon, making a shadow on the earth. And what that would, if you stood in that shadow on the earth, what it would look like is that the sun disappeared as the moon came across and covered it up using, we talked about perspective. So when it's close to us, like my thumb, close to looking at, like, say, the Empire State Building, you could make it disappear with my thumb. So that was a solar eclipse. Lunar eclipse is the opposite. This time, the moon is blocked out by the Earth's shadow. So the sun hits the moon, creates a shadow, and as the moon passes, the sun hits the Earth, creates a shadow, and as the moon passes into that shadow, it disappears. So if you were standing on this side of the Earth, which is the nighttime side of the Earth, right, because the sun's not hitting over there, the sun hits here, that's daytime, you're standing on the night, and you're looking up at the big full moon, and it passes into the shadow and goes dark. Strange phenomena, in the middle of it disappearing though, when it gets to the very middle of the shadow, it actually turns a reddish copper color. Why would it turn reddish copper when it's in the middle of a shadow? Good question, let me tell you. So let's back up for a second and pretend we're not standing on the Earth looking at the moon disappear, but we're standing on the moon looking at the Earth as it blocks the sun. So here's this big black Earth, the nighttime side of the Earth, looking all black, and it's blocking the sun in front of us. Well, all around it, there would be this red glow. And it's that red glow that's casting its light onto the moon, making it appear red. So remember, the moon reflects light. But why would it be red? So think back to our lesson about the sky, and the sky bounces off blue wavelength, or blue wavelengths. So the blue, like, scatters all over the sky, that's why the sky is blue, but the red passes through. So think in the middle of, in the early morning or late at night, when the sun comes in at an angle, blue bounces off and the red comes through, and then we see a sunset or a sunrise, the bright red sky. Well, if you were standing on the moon, looking at the Earth, you would see every sunset and every sunrise at exactly the same time, and all that light would be landing on you on the moon, reflecting at you, making the moon appear a reddish coppery color. That's a lunar eclipse. So what's the moon's atmosphere like? So remember we talked about atmosphere. Atmos is like the gases or the mists, and sphere is a ball. So the ball of gases around the moon. We talked about what the ball of gases is like around the Earth. What's it like on the moon? The answer is, there is none. No atmosphere at all around the moon. That means there's no gases, there's no cloud around the moon. It's just space and rock or land. So what does that mean that there's no atmosphere? What if I was to be on the moon? What would that look like? Well, first, there's no protection from the sun. So it's very, very bright, and all the dangerous rays from the sun that get filtered out by our atmosphere wouldn't be filtered out on the moon. So it's dangerous on the moon just from the sun alone. Second, there's no gases, which means there's no oxygen to breathe, which means that we couldn't even live there apart from bringing our own oxygen. So no protection from the sun, no oxygen. It would look, when you look out into the sky, what color do you think the sky would look? Blue? No, because it's our oxygen, or it's our atmosphere on Earth, that reflects the light to make it look blue. So for the moon, the sky would look pitch black. Like it looks at night on the Earth, it would look like that all the time from the moon. Black sky, no blue. Last thing, with no atmosphere, that means there's no protection from rocks or space debris either. So that moon is constantly being bombarded and hit by space rocks that leave big dents in it called craters. Okay, so these big dents on the moon that are left by the rocks are called craters. Now, wherever it's nice and smooth, these big flat plains, those are called maria, spelled M-A-R-I-A. So it's not Maria. Hola, Maria. No, it's not Maria, it's Maria are the plains, and craters are the holes. So those are craters, and this nice clean spot would be Maria. So here's an interesting fact about the moon. We know that it takes 28 days for the moon to go around the Earth. 1 month or month. So 28 days, 1 moon, or 1 month, 1 orbit around the Earth. How many days do you think it takes the moon to rotate on its axis, or like a moon day? Monday. Oh, interesting. Moon day. So how many days do you think it takes it to rotate? The answer is 28 days. So it's the exact same number of days that it takes to rotate as it does to revolve. And what that means practically is that the same side of the moon faces Earth all the time. It's always, they call it the light side of the moon. So it means we never see the dark side of the moon. It's always facing away from Earth. It's a mystery. They used to think maybe Martians lived on the dark side because no one could watch it with, this would be Martians, aliens, because Martians would be from Mars. But then no one knew it was on the dark side of the moon. So later on, when we were able to explore more and have satellites and take pictures, they learned that the light side of the moon has very, very few craters. But the dark side of the moon has a ton of craters. It is just scarred all over the place with craters, 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 craters. And over here, you know, a few craters, just enough to make it maybe look like there's a man in the moon. All right, so what does that mean? It means that the dark side of the moon is kind of like the shield side that's always facing out into the incoming rocks, and it takes all the impact from the meteorites and the space debris and the space rocks. So a couple key things to remember. The moon has no atmosphere, so no oxygen, no protection from the sun. The sky is black, no protection from rocks. And probably the most important thing is that it takes 28 days to revolve around the Earth and 28 days to rotate on its axis. So if this quick demonstration. So if I was revolving with no rotation, I'd be facing the same way. And so if this was the Earth, I would be facing the Earth. Now I'm not facing the Earth. Now I'm facing the Earth. No, I'm not facing the Earth. But if I rotated at the same speed that I revolved, see how my body's turning? I'm facing away from the camera, facing towards the camera, facing away from the camera, and back towards the camera. So one, I was rotating while I was revolving, and the other one, I was not rotating while revolving. Kind of a tricky concept, but believe me, we will have some fun games with this in class. Gravity is our last topic for the day in talking about the moon. So, does the moon have more or less gravity than the Earth? Well, if it has something that has more mass, it has more gravity. I think you guys remember that. And so since the moon is smaller than the Earth and has less packed into it, the moon has less mass and therefore it has less gravity. So what does that mean? If I were to stand on the moon, I would be able to run farther, jump higher, my body would weigh less. How much less? Well, let's say you weighed 150 pounds. You would be as if you weighed 25 pounds. That's a lot less. So let's just picture one of the Calebs in class who probably couldn't pick me up no matter how hard they tried, because I weigh a lot. On the moon, if we were standing up there, well then my 150 pound body, or give or take a little bit, would weigh like 25 pounds. So it'd be like lifting a sack of potatoes. So one of the Calebs could easily lift me up and probably even throw me across the moon's surface. So here's the next question. Does the moon pull on the Earth, or does the Earth pull on the moon? Think about that one. Okay, I hope you have enough time to think about it. The answer is both. The moon pulls on the Earth and the Earth pulls on the moon. They both pull on each other. So the Earth, that has more gravity because it has more mass, holds the moon in orbit. But what does it mean that the moon pulls on the Earth? Well, the Earth is made up of solid rock and dirt and ocean and water. So that ocean, that water, is fluid. It can actually move, right? Like waves back and forth. So when the moon pulls on the water, it bulges up like that. Like there's the moon pulling out and the water will bulge up. And so that makes a high tide where the water, if you were standing in that area, rises up and it comes up higher onto the beach. But then if all the water is going this way, then like maybe in a different area of the world, the water is going down. And so because these things are always moving, wherever you happen to be by the ocean, there's high and low tides. So when the moon is pulling near you, it's lifting the water, and when the moon's pulling on a different part of the Earth, it's shallow and making the water recede and go down. So on the beach, you can see the water come up really far onto the beach in a high tide, and come back down and sweep back out to the sea on low tide. So the tides don't cause the waves. It's the wind that causes the waves and the choppy waves on the ocean. But the tide is like the big, powerful, mighty swell, and then the big, powerful, mighty sweep back out. One of the nice things about that, though, is that the moon actually helps keep our oceans and shorelines clean, right? So the tide comes in and it grabs everything on shore and then sweeps it back out, and it keeps things moving and churning so that it's always being cleaned and refreshed. So that's a little bit about the tides and how the moon pulls on the liquid of the Earth. They used to think the word lunatic, I think we talked about that earlier, was like well, you guys took anatomy class, the body is made up mostly of water. So people thought that maybe the moon would pull on the water in your brain and make you get crazy, and they would call them like lunatics, that the moon would affect their brains and they'd get crazy on a full moon or something like that. So some interesting thoughts just about the moon and its gravity and how it affects the Earth. I will see you guys in class shortly.